In this video, I'd like to go through some of the things I've learned from the likes of Sadhguru, Jay Shetty, Tom Bilyeu, even Jim Carrey, as well as some things that I've found out by trial and error in my own life. Now, whenever listening to advice from anybody else, it's important to remember that what works in somebody else's life may not work in our own lives. That doesn't mean it won't work, but it may not. So again, it's important to try things and see what works for you. The first thing I've learned is that more won't help. How many times have we fooled ourselves thinking it's going to be that next job or that new house or new car that's going to make everything right? But after a few days of getting any one of those things, we feel the same. You see, what we need to be aiming for is finding happiness within ourselves, so we're not reliant on external items or events happening. Because often when those things happen, it's not lasting. The second thing is starting with abundance when trying to change behaviors. So often what we do is we decide there's a behavior that's not very healthy in our life or very helpful, and we seek to remove it. But we don't replace it with anything else. When we do that, we actually feel like our life has shrunk, even if in theory it's shrunk for the better. But by starting with adding things to our life that give us happiness and purpose, it's then much easier to let go of the things that don't give us purpose, don't give us happiness. So start with abundance. The next item is making what's most important, most important. And what I mean by that is that instead of trying to keep 10 or 15 balls in the air through life, instead, try and keep just 4 or 5 in the air, but then really focusing on them. Those things that give you great happiness and purpose. For instance, your family. So by only having a few balls in the air, you can feel like you're doing a better job at it than having 10 or 15 in the air and you feel like you're just doing an average job on all of them. The next item is taking responsibility for our own emotions and our own happiness. I don't believe it's anybody's responsibility to make me happy. I also don't believe that I have to compulsively react to everything that happens around me. And that's quite liberating. When you can be how you want to be, regardless of what's going on around you, then you're truly free. The next item is using desire as a tool. So desire is really useful. If you want to get anything done, having a strong desire to get it done is going to motivate you, it's going to help you. But at some point, desire can become unhelpful for a particular item. And then it actually gives us suffering. An example of this is somebody who wants to win a championship in sport. Their desire helps them improve, helps them get to the final. And their desire helps them perform in the final. But let's say at the end of that game or match, they've lost. If they then continue to hang on to that desire when it's no longer useful, when the game's already finished, it'll only give them suffering. So at that point, it's important that they put their desire away and use it next time. It's no longer helpful to them, it will only give them suffering at that point. Another way we can bring suffering to ourselves is to think, I wish this happened, or I wish that didn't happen. Once something has happened, resisting it is not useful. It's not possible. It's already occurred. So when we say to ourselves, I wish this had happened, or I wish that hadn't have happened, we actually only cause ourselves suffering. It doesn't achieve anything else. Once something has happened, we simply need to be able to accept it. The next item is not loving anything that doesn't love you back. So for instance, let's say you enjoy watching TV, but after watching a few shows in a row, you feel lethargic, you feel like you've wasted some time. That's an example of something that doesn't love you back. So whilst it's okay to watch TV, you have to decide how much time and how much love you're going to give that. Because if it's not loving you back, then there may be something else you could be doing with that time. The next item is being cautious about how often you complain. See, sometimes it's beneficial to get something off our chest, but other times we can just be simply complaining almost out of habit. And the more we complain, the more likely we are to complain in the future. It's almost like a snowball that gets going. And before you know it, we're spending a lot of our time talking about things that we don't like. It's also important to try not to say negative things about ourselves. You see, when we say negative things about ourselves, we actually hear that ourselves. It actually reinforces that to ourselves. So as an example, I always used to say, I'm bad at remembering names. And as a consequence, I was bad at remembering names because I wouldn't try as hard. I didn't know I wasn't trying as hard, but I just wasn't. So more recently, I've started saying to myself, I'm good at remembering names. And I'm actually finding I'm naturally giving it more effort, more focus, and I'm actually doing a better job of it. Now, I'm not saying go and simply say positive things about yourself, because that's actually not required either. What you want to avoid is saying lots of negative things about yourself. Because when you say negative things about yourself, it's actually more impactful than when you say positive things about yourself. The next item is a trap we can often find ourselves in. So that's when we have an issue, or perhaps there was some conflict in our lives that we just think about again and again. We find ourselves rehabbing that conversation or that thought process again and again. So instead of having that thought process over and over, instead, when you feel yourself or notice yourself starting to think about it again, if you've already thought about it, remind yourself that you've thought about this and you don't need to do it again. On that same line of thought is the fact that we often spend our lives thinking more than doing. And as our lives have become more comfortable in certain parts of the world, we might be thinking 90% of the time and actually doing 10% of the time. We're trying to live in our heads. When we do that, we're not actually able to figure out what we enjoy doing, what works, what doesn't, because we're just guessing. We're taking the past and applying it to the future and assuming it'll run the same. But when you actually take action, you actually get real feedback on what you're enjoying. So a percentage Jay Shetty suggests we aim for is to take action 70% of the time and think 30% of the time, because even though you may make mistakes in taking that much action, you may do things you wish you hadn't have done or that you had done another way. By taking that much action, you will constantly be learning about yourself and about the world around you, and you'll actually be happier as a result. Another item is being patient about any goals you have, but impatient about any steps you can take towards that goal. So if you've got a particular goal in mind, it may take some years to get there, and you're going to need patience. But you don't want to be patient about what you could be doing right now. You want to be impatient about the next step you can take. Because when you're impatient about the next step you can take, then you'll find yourself taking more steps more frequently, and that'll actually help you get to your goal sooner. Another great piece of advice I once heard is that you don't need to sign for other people's opinions. So what that means is if somebody's sending you, say, disappointment, you don't need to accept it. Just because they're sending it to you doesn't mean you need to accept it. You don't need to sign for it. You can just let it be placed at your feet, and you can look at it and decide whether there's anything to learn from it. But anything there's not, then just leave it there. The next item, which I think is really important, is to take slightly longer to respond. So what that means is, if something happens, let's say something that could be quite frustrating, by simply taking a little bit longer to respond, you're far more likely to respond in a way that you'll later be proud of. When we respond immediately, often we do it based on our emotions, not necessarily what the situation requires at the time. But by just adding, say, half a second before responding, it actually gives ourselves a chance to take control of our response. A little bit like the trap of getting into a habit of complaining a lot is also getting into the habit of thinking about what we don't want more than what we do want. When we think about what we don't want in life, we actually remove enthusiasm. It takes away optimism as well. But when we think about what we do want, it actually gives us energy. And we can use that energy to then go and chase those things that we want. But when we think about what we don't want, it actually takes energy away from us and leaves us feeling deflated. The next item is taking confidence from the fact that you can learn something, not from what you already know. See, what you could know is limitless. So if you try and build your confidence around the fact that you know X, Y, and Z, then you'll only ever be able to feel a certain amount of confidence. And you'll only be able to accept opportunities that are in line with those things you already know. But instead, if you build your confidence around the fact that you can learn things, when opportunities come along, you can accept them because you know you can go and get the skills you need. The second last item is that feeling entitlement is a fast way to feeling frustrated and let down. The opposite of feeling entitled is to be grateful. So when we're not entitled, we don't necessarily have any expectations that anybody is going to do anything for us, and therefore we're not let down when that doesn't happen. Instead, when something does happen for us, we actually can feel grateful, and that's a far more uplifting emotion. And the final item I have for you today is a story I heard from Jim Carrey. He was talking about his father, who was a promising musician. His father had the opportunity to pursue music as a career, but he felt like it wasn't a very safe career to go for. So he went for a career in accounting. And after doing that for a number of years, he was actually let go from the accountancy firm. And what Jim Carrey realized from that is that you can fail at what you don't want just as much as you can fail at what you do want. So next time you're going to strive for something, make it something you do really want.